Welcome to Disambiguation. I'm your host, Michael Fauscette. Each week, we interview experts in artificial intelligence, generative AI, and business automation to help business leaders understand how to use these tools for the biggest business impact. Our show today is AI is a human problem, why change management is broken and storytelling is the fix. I'm joined by Gavin McMahon, co-founder and CEO of fassforward. Gavin, welcome.
Hi, Michael. Happy to be here.
I'm looking forward to this. I've had several conversations recently about change management and how this all fits together. So I think this will be a fun conversation. Just to get us started, I mean, you have a really interesting background. I mean, you're an engineer by training, 30 years in consulting across all sorts of different industries, automotive, defense, tech. And I know you were at Gartner before we actually talked about digital transformation. I guess we haven't made that up yet. And in 2001, you co-founded fassforward, which, has grown into leadership, storytelling, consultancy, and you work with a lot of big companies, Verizon, Mastercard, et cetera. And you just published Story Business as well. So I'd love to understand, how that arc from engineering through strategy consulting now to storytelling leads you, to the conclusion that AI, at its core is a human problem.
Yeah, sure. If I'm going to put it all down to one word, I will choose the word decision, or maybe I might choose judgment. But I actually think for me, that journey, that arc that you described and what we do is really about human engineering. Growing up as an engineer, when I started, you view the world in this very black and white way, 1 + 1 = 2, or you view things through a technology lens. If I just build it like this, it'll obviously work. And over time, I discovered that wasn't true. Certainly back when I was at Gartner, I can remember this is in the early days of the internet, and I was one of the people that was there moving Gartner essentially from paper as a delivery to online, which is fun because you're doing that in an environment where the analysts are obviously telling the world this is how you do it, and we're doing it internally. But it's always people. Everything comes down to people have to execute. People have to get behind it. People have to make a decision. And, it doesn't matter what your best laid plan is. If you can't execute it, it doesn't work. My colleague Rose, she has a great saying, which is execution validates strategy. And I think that is so true. You have this great intent. I mean, now everyone's got AI in the middle of whatever that is. And doesn't matter what the strategy is, doesn't matter who sold it to you, doesn't matter how brilliant you think it is. If you can't execute it, it's not going to work. And I think that then is a human problem. And I think storytelling, the book that I've recently written, Story Business, is really our view, fassforward's view on how do you drive change in an organization, because you have to get people on board. And I think AI is at that inflection point. And you just saw it, a few months ago with the huge JVs that were announced by Anthropic and OpenAI. The only reason they did that is they've sold everyone the technology. Now they need to get everyone to use it.
Yeah, I mean, that's been an interesting development, and I feel more and more you see conversations around the longer term implementation and support and that sort of thing. So definitely a lot of awareness now, I guess, as companies are really trying to scale out a pilot into production, that brings that more to the forefront, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
When we were doing the prep, you said something in our call I thought was really interesting, and frankly something I've heard from a couple other guests recently too, and it's that you don't really like the term change management, and I like this framing. You called it a way of outsourcing anxiety and outsourcing the mess to a well-meaning project manager, which unfortunately I think I've been the project manager a lot, so I get that. But this is pretty provocative, right? I mean, a lot of organizations talk about change management frameworks and, especially for AI. But can you break that down a little bit for us? I mean, what do you think is broken about traditional change management, and why it fails specifically in the context of AI and what we're doing today?
Well, I've been part of plenty of change projects, and depending who you get your source and data from, there's a big percentage of them that fail, especially if you stick digital transformation in front of that. So obviously there's a whole army of, I think, very well-meaning, well-intended, skilled, highly capable people who become change managers. I think the reason that change management is broken is it's a power dynamic. The leader in the organization wants the change. Maybe it's the CEO, maybe it's the CIO that's driving this change. And there's all sorts of people in the business who basically hold some kind of power. And the change manager usually has little to no power. They have responsibility. They're responsible for the program. They're responsible for the internal communications. They're responsible for the messaging, but they don't really control anything. And so I think at its worst, change management is a leader outsourcing their angst and their anxiety to basically a project manager and saying to that person, you just handle the mess and the messaging, and I'll go back to my regular day job. And your regular day job is change. Why would you outsource that? You might as well just, go home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, so I don't like the term change management. I think we should think about change leadership.
Yeah, I like that. I like that shift, and I've had this argument for years, and I know it's a hot topic of what's leadership and what's management, and why are they not the same thing, right? And I think that's important. You need to manage the work around the change, but honestly, you don't move people unless you lead it, right? And yeah. I'm curious, in the AI context, the rate of change is compressed dramatically, right? And what was that compared to going from algebra to calculus we talked about? So what does leading change actually look like when the technology shifts every 3 months or less? And these old playbooks, they sort of assume that the tech is stable for a year and a half, 2 years or more, right?
Yeah. I mean, think about digital transformation again. Go to that number, 60, 70, 80% fail. Yeah. But even then, when you had these big projects, what you did know, what was not going to change, is the technology that you were putting in place was going to be the same 18 months later when you finished, but still 80% or 60% fail. Now, what we know for absolute sure is that the technology will change in 6 months or 3 months or 2 weeks. If you're an AI expert today and you go on a very long sabbatical and don't read anything, don't do anything, you will be AI impoverished in 6 months because you will be completely out of date. It's changing so fast. So I think, and I'm not saying this from a technical lens, I think about this from a change and a people lens. I think the limiter, the rate limit on change, is the organization's appetite for change, the structure in an organization and what it will cope with, and individuals and teams and their ability to deal with change. So when I go back to that separation between management and leadership, for me, you lead people and you manage work, which is why it's all about, I have to lead change. And the question is, how do I lead people through this change? And what, Michael, what I think is funny, and not in a good way, funny, strange maybe, or funny, peculiar, is you've had organizations or the frontier AI firms have gone out and they've said, this is going to change the world. And they've gone out with warnings saying maybe it's not going to change the world for the better. And now you're seeing newspaper articles, you're seeing press coverage saying this is going to be terrible. And you wonder why, because we're talking about it in this way where it's big and scary and it's unknown and it's unknowable and it's a black box and it's a genie out of the bottle and all this stuff. Why do you think people are worried? Why do you think we need to lead change? So getting back to this idea of leading change, your job as a leader is imagine change as this, or I imagine change as this this set of rapids or a whitewater in a river. And you've got a whole bunch of people trying to swim upstream. Your job as a leader is just to create, you can't change the river, but you can create some kind of pool of stillness where people, A, will not drown, and B, hopefully can make some progress upstream. That's all you're trying to do.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like that because of all the hype and frankly, maybe lack of transparency or maybe even misguided objectives in a lot of companies that I've seen, like they really focus on productivity, but perhaps they haven't really looked at the workflow and the people and how that impacts. And I know you use storytelling as a tool, as a leadership tool, which,
Yeah.
Frankly, I really love. I mean, I've tried to weave that through a lot of the message around how you help people understand technology. And a lot of companies, and we talked about this, storytelling is kind of a marketing function. And I know you think that's a mistake. I would agree with that. But, your argument is that people will not change until they see themselves in it, right? I mean, there has to be a way to put yourself in the story. Can you explain how storytelling works in that as a mechanism for AI adoption? And, what does it look like when a leader uses narrative to move people through fear, uncertainty that AI and the AI hype has created?
Yeah. So it's a multi-part answer to that question. I'll try and boil it down to its essence. First of all, you have to remember that storytelling is partial. You never see the whole thing. You just see pieces of it. And you as the reader, as the audience, as the viewer, you fill in the rest of it. So, and some of those details are not important. So, if you read Hemingway, he had this theory of writing, which is called the iceberg theory, which is the reader's going to fill in all the bits. Mm-hmm. We're filling in the bits, and leaders, essentially, or leading organizations are telling you the bare bones of AI using big, scary, rapid words, and people are filling in the rest of it. And the rest of it they're filling in is, what's going to happen to me? What about my job? What about my identity? Where do I fit? Will I be able to provide for my family? And we're not even thinking about it. It's very difficult for CEOs of organizations who are relatively well paid and relatively well off, or anyone in the C-suite. I'm not saying they're not empathetic, but you don't live at the bottom end of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Security and stability, no problem. For you, it's all self-actualization. But if you take something like AI, which is threatening people's livelihoods, threatening their identity, and you start talking about it in the wrong way, it's not going to work. So storytelling is people filling in the picture for themselves, and they're filling in a scary horror movie right now. I think when organizations have gone out and talked about AI, most of our experience is it's a productivity hack. I'm doing something that it would have taken me days to do before, and now it's not days. So organizations are not really, they're realizing the expense, the cost of tokens, the cost of everything else, but they're not really realizing any productivity gains because they haven't gone into workflow. They haven't thought about, how does this change business model? How does this ultimately change the value? It will change all of those things. So I think the C-level of organizations have got a lot more work to do. And all they're concerned about right now is AI activation, which is fine, but that's just like saying, I'm going to build a new house and I bought the plot of land, I'm done. You are not done. You haven't thought about where you're going to live, like what kind of house you want, what you want to do in that house. All of this stuff has been left unsaid. So getting back to change, people can get excited about change. I'm going to, if I buy a new set of golf clubs, I could get very excited about a change that is a new set of golf clubs. But I can also get very scared about change. You have to see yourself in the picture, and you have to see yourself in a positive way, which then gets back to telling the right story. But you can't tell the right story until you have the right strategy to latch that onto. And I think a lot of organizations are even struggling to figure out what that strategy is beyond AI. I have an AI strategy.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost that we've pushed so much and there's been so much noise that companies boards and the executive teams look at it and go like, oh, well, we have to do this. It's a competitive advantage, or, I feel compelled to do this because the board told me. And yet we aren't really putting it in the context of what is it we're actually trying to do with this? What's the workflow like? How do we take what's perhaps broken now and make it work in an environment with that machine assist and think through that, right? And that's, that in itself, I guess, if I'm an employee, that's scary to me, because there's not a whole story. Here's this tool, now you're going to be 4 times as productive. Well, how? I don't, like, we're not even really helping people understand that. So that fear has to be really a big player in this right now.
Also, I think we're looking at a set of steps where we're coming into the middle of the set of steps, and I can go down the steps or up the steps. Mm-hmm. Down is, let's get more productive. Let's make us more efficient. Up is somehow create more value. Yeah. And people are looking at up and thinking, I don't know how to do that. So they're just turning right and going down. And that is literally a race to the bottom, because if I'm more productive, let's say, I'm in the analyst business, right? So let's say I now start producing more research, and what used to take me 4 weeks to write a research note, with Claude, I can do it in an hour. Okay, so I do it in an hour. How long before your clients are going to say, well, why am I paying X $1,000 for this thing that you did in an hour? Yeah. Can I get some money back, please? I still want you to do it, but I only want to pay a couple $100 for this thing. So it's a race to the bottom unless you can figure out what the new value is, and that's really hard. I'll give you an example. We're both old enough to remember, on Saturdays in the 80s and 90s, people used to go to shopping malls. Shopping malls were these big, full of people things with Jamba Juices and McDonald's and food courts, but they also had all sorts of shops, and people would go there to answer 2 types of value. One value was, I actually want to buy something, and the other was, I've got nothing to do this Saturday, I want to be entertained. Now, fast forward only 20 or 30 years, that has completely shifted. You rarely see shopping malls anymore. Right. And the value shift, because of the internet, has gone. So we get our entertainment. I want to be entertained on a Saturday from Netflix, or just doom scrolling through a phone, and buying stuff, I get off Amazon. That shift was relatively slow. And I think what we're going to experience with AI is a much, much quicker shift, but on that kind of breadth. And what's interesting is, again, if you think about value, there was a job inside the shopping mall, which was the person that did the window displays. Mm-hmm. And the value provided to the organization was that person, if they do that job really well with that skill of dressing the mannequins and doing all the other things, brought shoppers into the company, and the shoppers bought something. Now, over 20 years, that value just shifted to UX and UI designers and SEO specialists, who essentially have the same function, but in a completely, you would never retrain somebody that's a window dresser to a UX designer. Maybe, well, no organization would. Maybe the individual would choose to do that, but an organization wouldn't do that. But we're going through that kind of shift, and we're going through that where that took years. We're in dog years or months, really, in terms of how quickly this is going to happen.
Yeah, that makes sense. It seems to me too, there's been this narrative in business for quite a while about, data-driven decision making and the value of data, right? And I know when we were talking before, you made an observation that I thought was really intuitive, and that's, most leaders think they have a piece of data that's going to convince everybody, and they're excited by that, right? But people, they don't make decisions from data; they make decisions out of hope and fear. And then use the data afterwards to rationalize the decision they already made. I mean, that has real implications for how organizations build the case for AI. I mean, if data alone doesn't move people, what does? And how should leaders frame the AI conversation differently to actually reach those people?
So yeah, the way I think about it is what I call a motive triangle. So hope, fear, and reason. And so the reason is the data piece. The decision, I think any decision, and neuroscience backs this up, we basically make decisions emotionally. But as human beings, we like to rationalize them. So we're irrational in the decision making, but we completely think we're rational human beings. Hope and fear, this will make me look good. This will make me better. This will get me my promotion. This will get hopefully my boss will stop moaning at me. There's a lot of hope that goes into making this decision. And there's a lot of fear that goes into this decision. I can't mess this up. I can't go wrong. This could be a career limiting move. I could spend a lot of money. It could all go disastrously wrong. All the objections you hear in a sales call are all hope and fear, right? And they're all about making a decision. You can't operate on that alone because no decision is in an organization is made in a vacuum. If you and I work together and you're my boss, Michael, and I have the budget authority to do something, I could make that decision through hope and fear, but I have to explain it to you. I'm not going to turn around and say, well, I hope this makes me look good. And I'm worried that if it goes wrong, I should have picked the other guy. No, I'm going to have some kind of rationale, which is where I turn to, the Gartner research or whatever piece of data I've got. And that's what I use. But the decision is not made on the data alone. It's really interesting. I was talking to, I don't know if you play golf, but I was watching the US Open. So at the time of this recording, the US Open was yesterday, the golf. What's interesting is golf as a sport, all sports, I think, the World Cup is on, the amount of data that is being gathered and used by sportsmen who previously would have been a million miles away from data 30 years ago, wouldn't have thought about it. But in golf, they're looking at, look, if I miss the green here, statistically, I can get up and down here. So I'm going to hit to this side of the green, not that side of the green, all of this. So a lot of data. But every one of these teams, whether it's actually in the form of the coach, whether it's football, soccer, golf, where they have a team of people around them, people in Formula One who have telemetry all over the place, there's a lot of human psychology in it as well. A lot of being in the moment. I'm going to hit one shot at a time. So for every data, we're going to make decisions with data. Any winning team also has all this, the human side of it taken care of. And I think that's what we're forgetting with AI. You can't just treat people like we've made this decision, 1 + 1 = 2, therefore AI, therefore we're going to do this. Because organizations have hundreds, thousands of people in them, and you got to bring them along.
Yeah. Recently I read something that's interesting that showed up over the last year, really, and that's companies are discovering that employees are actually sabotaging AI initiatives. And you reacted to that when I shared it with you before. That, well, yeah, of course, because they have been told that they're going to lose their job in a year, and that's scary, right? And I think you used the analogy about the Luddites during the Industrial Revolution, that people revolted because they faced threat to their basic needs. I mean, how should leaders think about that kind of resistance? And what do you do about it? What do you do differently to avoid triggering that fight or flight sort of response?
Well, I think first of all, if leaders are experiencing that, they should start looking in the mirror and thinking about whether they are actually leaders, because they're not. They're tellers, and they're telling people that this is where we're going to go and this is what we're going to do. They're not leading people to that. It's interesting you use the words people are sabotaging. So the word sabotage comes from, the root word is sabo, which is a clog, which I believe the Dutch version of the Luddites took their clogs off, wooden shoes, and stuck them in the machines. And so that's where sabotage comes from. So yeah, it's all about bringing people along. And I think there's a right way to do this. There was a recent news article from IKEA. So IKEA, I think, recognized that in their call centers, talking about workflow, we could get AI to do a lot of this stuff that our call center people are handling. But they also recognized in their call centers that people that are calling up have a lot of interior decor and interior design type questions, which AI is not capable of doing and requires human empathy and basically a lot more human to get someone to feel as though they're making the right decision. And so they retrained everyone that they were taking, that they were replacing with AI to a higher level, more strategic, more interesting job. And that's the right way to do AI activation. I think the wrong way, the way that's expensive, let's say, in terms of value and in terms of reputation, is I'm just going to fire a bunch of people. I'm going to blame AI for that firing. And then I'm going to rehire the kind of people I like, because I don't want to go through this pain and change, because it's too difficult for me as a leader. So that's what I'm doing. And, list any big tech leader, and that's kind of what's going on.
Mm. I mean, that kind of leads you into this concept around, there's this sort of structural argument around work, right? I mean, and I think when we were talking before, you said something about squeezing an AI-sized peg into a square hole, because humans think in terms of task and jobs, and AI doesn't really operate at human-sized task levels. Like getting a board deck ready for your boss, that's human-sized task, not an AI-sized task. And there's sort of no one-for-one replacement there. I mean, can you expand on that a little bit? I mean, what does it mean for how organizations should redesign the work rather than just try to automate existing jobs?
Sure. I mean, we've had basically since the Industrial Revolution, we've had hundreds of years about thinking about jobs and thinking about how do we split up work. And we've split up work around functional specializations. So accountants, lawyers, HR people, engineers, whatever. And we break that down a little bit like a military hierarchy, because, after the Second World War, we borrowed a ton of ideas from how the Second World War was run and brought that back into the kind of what we think of now as the modern organization. So work is broken down into these very human-shaped components, which are jobs, and that job has a specialization, that job has a bunch of experience, and basically you get paid for the level of experience and authority you have at that job. That's how all jobs work. And it's very rare that you get jobs that you get worse at as you get older. Sports people, movie stars, maybe, because they're not as good looking as they used to be. But everyone else, like as you get older and more experienced, you generally go up this ladder. That's how the world has worked. With AI, we're thinking about it, AI as a human-shaped object that can replace a job, and it just can't. It doesn't think that way. Generative AI, and I'm sure it's going to get better. And I'm not, again, go back to all the conversation we've had about how quickly it's changing. This statement may age very rapidly. But right now, AI is like an army of ants doing a job that a human could do. But each agent is a little ant that is doing something. We as humans think, I've got to get that board deck ready for the CEO, and there's a board presentation. And that for us is one task, one item on our list that we knock off. For AI, that's 1,000 things to do. And so it's a complete misnomer to say AI will replace a job. No, it will replace parts of your job. And that's why the right thing is to think about workflows, because you want to think about, what is all the work that I do? What's the really interesting stuff? What's the stuff where being human and being empathetic is actually really useful? And what's the stuff that's really boring and repetitive? And you want to start splitting that. But really what you're doing is you're splitting a workflow. You're not splitting a job. What that is going to mean is that how we create value is going to completely change. So go back to the window dresser and the UX designer. It's all going to change, and it's just going to be messy for a good few years as we go through that. So in sum, I just say humans think about it as a book and chapter level. AI is at a words and sentences kind of level.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I use Claude a decent amount in my work, and with the reasoning models, you sit there and you watch it, and it actually goes through and it breaks out all these little granular tasks that it's doing as it's doing. And I don't think I might work that way, but watching that is really interesting to go like, oh yeah, I mean, I guess I do have to do those things underneath the task if I'm trying to accomplish something, but I don't really think about it that way. Like I don't think about it in that granular step by step by step kind of a way.
Well, also as we're helping our clients go through this workflow process and rethink how it is, and we're doing it in a way that brings people along from a, let's use that word, change management perspective, but how do we lead through change? One of the big things that we've done is to think about it, is to separate out the tasks and say, look, actually, when humans get together, you are doing something that is productive. You're producing. So I'm producing the PowerPoint deck. I'm analyzing something that's on a spreadsheet, or I'm working with a piece of software that does something. So I'm doing the productivity bit. There's a coordination bit. Michael, did you know that XYZ is happening? Where are you in your part of the job? And then there's a decision bit. And humans munge those three things together all the time. So if we have a meeting, we're producing, we're coordinating, we're deciding, all like in a big tangled mess. That's not good for AI. AI can be really good for most of the productivity bit if you break down the tasks. It can help support the coordination bit, and it's pretty useless at the judgment bit. So humans are going to have to shift towards the right and move towards judgment, which again, think about really big organizations. Big organizations use hierarchy and friction in the hierarchy as a proxy almost for judgment. Oh, I'm not going to do that because my boss wouldn't like it. Well, actually, deciding what's on the not to-do list because of friction in the hierarchy is a judgment. And if we reduce the layers in the hierarchy and we reorganize organizations, we got to think about where is all that going to come from in the future.
Yeah. I mean, I think judgment is a big part of that. In a hybrid workforce, what part's human, what part's AI, and how do you put that together to make it in a workflow that makes sense from both perspectives, right?
Right. And how do you teach judgment? The easy thing is I'm not going to teach it. I'm going to hire it, which means I'm going to hire my new bottom age range for hiring is anyone over 50. Yeah. Probably illegal, but that's what I'm going to do. So that's where judgment. But then I get this big pig in a python problem where basically I don't have anyone that's 22 is not learning judgment, because the way we used to do it is go and do the spreadsheet. I'm not going to explain it, and by the way, get me a coffee, which is I'm being a little mean about the way internships work, but it's kind of that. And then maybe if you're good, I'll explain it to you later. And after 5 years of making a lot of mistakes, you'll learn a couple of things. And then another 5 years. That's how we've built experience. Yeah. We've got to somehow, again, when judgment is the only thing that matters, and knowledge is not really that important anymore, because I can get knowledge from AI. Yep. Know-how, the application of knowledge is huge, because I want to be able to trust what comes out of the AI system, the AI workflow, whatever I'm using. We got to think about how do we build that into organizations. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that is one narrative that does scare me. And I was listening to an interview with an engineering leader last week, and they said that, they see companies now hiring for senior engineering, architecture kind of positions, and no entry level, because, well, we're using AI to do all the entry level work, and that's fine for some period of time. But then how do you hire for positions that you're not training people to ever do? That's a real conundrum that's going to play out more and more and more as we go into this. I think that if people were going to take away one thing from this conversation, this is what I would hope. they should be constantly asking themselves, am I using, first of all, do you agree with this statement? AI is a non-traditional problem. And if you agree with that statement, that AI is a non-traditional problem, just in terms of the organizational change, the dynamics around it, whatever's going to happen, how I'm going to use it, how I'm going to build it into workflows, non-traditional problem. The second question that you should ask yourself is, am I using traditional thinking to solve a non-traditional problem? And if you are, that's okay, but you should really be aware of that. And I think we're tending to do that. We're tending to, use a hammer because we think it's a nail. And I don't know that that's going to work all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, good points. I know you've talked about a competition framework, and I found this discussion really interesting, compelling. At individual level, you either get in or AI, into AI, or you're going to be left behind, or organizational, your competitors are doing it, so you don't have a choice, right? There's competitive pressure. Societal level, China's doing it, so the US has to do it. I mean, what you asked the question, where's the constraint in that system? And I think that's a really interesting point to push on. Where's the voice that says, hang on, maybe this is bad for people? I mean, who gets to pump the brakes, and is anybody actually doing that effectively right now?
I mean, the answer is very few people. So it's a little bit like, it's the tragedy of the commons. So, which is an old, I don't know where that dates back to, but I know in medieval England, you used to have the commons, which was common land. And if you were a sheep farmer, you could have your sheep graze on the commons. But the thing is, if everyone has a load of sheep and everyone uses the commons, then you have the tragedy of the commons, which is there's no grass left for the sheep and the sheep die. So I think we're kind of into that little situation a bit with AI, because on an individual level, it's a very difficult decision for you to say, no, I'm not going to do it, because you have to at least performatively be on the AI bandwagon, because it's very obvious to, I think, anyone that is thinking, and a knowledge worker is saying, well, I got to get in on this because otherwise I'm going to get left behind. And really your competition is other people. On an organizational level, there's no business. I mean, every business in the world has basically gone and said, this is what we're doing with AI. This is how we're adding it to our product, because they can't afford to be second. They can't afford to be left behind. And so even though all the CEOs are saying AI and I want it now, and maybe they don't know exactly what they want to do or how they're going to do it, they're all racing towards this because they're in that same tragedy of the commons kind of race. And then on a societal level, all the tech oligarchs in the US, whenever there's any constraint put against AI, they just say, well, look at China, we're going to be left behind. So we've got this arms race that's going on. And I think it's, I think about capitalism and socialism. And in the US, well, in a lot of places around the world, capitalism is generally viewed more positively and socialism is viewed more negatively. It depends where you go in the world. But the root of both those things, the root of capital is the word capital. Capitalism is capital. That's money. I need that. I need money to be able to live, to pay for food, to pay for a roof over my head. Social, that's friends and family and love and connections. I need that. I may not like to admit that I need it, but I need it. And I think we're kind of causing a massive imbalance in that system because we're over-indexed, especially with AI, on this kind of race to capitalism. And we're not thinking about the societal impact of it, which is going to be a problem. So you asked who's doing it well. I actually think Anthropic is doing it well because they've gone out and said, look, we're going to do AI, but we're going to try and do it responsibly. They're having this David and Goliath argument with the US government right now, where I honestly think I frame it as David and Goliath because I do think they will win, even though they're not the size of the US government, because I think they've got right on their side. They've thought through this a lot more. And you can see every time they've had an argument, like they had that big blow up with the Department of Defense a few months ago. It just did wonders for their valuation and the amount of people using it, because people feel like at least they're a little bit more responsible. So I'm going to get on that particular bandwagon. So yeah, I don't really know who's doing it well. I do think it's a problem that we're talking about responsible AI governance, but we're not talking about, I think, the societal impact enough. Yeah, it would be like, think about this in a different way, Michael. I don't know what the number is, but in blue collar employment, there's something like 16 or 17% of the blue collar jobs are something to do with transport. FedEx truck driver, long distance lorry driver, train driver, tram driver, whatever. If they ever actually figure out autonomous vehicles, it means you don't need any of those people. Yeah. Imagine the political blowback if you've taken 16% of the blue collar workforce out of work because you replaced it with essentially robots or autonomous vehicles. That's not a good place to be in, because going back to capitalism needs people to buy stuff. So I think it's a big mess that's not been thought through, but either way, it doesn't change what you have to do if you run a company or a part of the management team that runs a company, because you're still in that race with the person next to you.
Mm. Yeah. This interesting tie-in seems to me, for the last 20, 25 years, we've kind of gone through this evolution of social media. It was this grand opportunity, we thought, and then, more and more it's become darker and darker, and terms like doom scrolling, and things like that have really come out. And I think a lot of us have watched this evolution with a certain amount of fear, because it has certainly gone in directions that I wouldn't have guessed 25 years ago. But, we didn't really know how bad it could be, but it has proven itself as a real double-edged sword at best, right? And I wonder, with AI, we have the chance to perhaps apply that paradigm to the risk. I mean, obviously AI is moving faster than social media developed, but do you think there are things we can learn from that? And what, are we headed down the same path again?
I think we're headed down the same path again, and faster. I think the thing we should know is something we know for ourselves. Checks and balances are a good thing, right? I would love to eat if my diet could only exist of carrot cake all day, every day, I would be a happy camper. I would only be a happy camper for a couple of years, maybe. I don't know if I would even make it past a year, because there are no checks and balances. Yeah. So, but we turn so checks and balances, if I say that, okay, I can see I don't want the fox guarding the hen house. That makes sense. But then if I say, oh, okay, so in the real world, that's called regulation. Oh, no. We don't like regulation because that's bad for us. So we're relying on the goodness of people who are already stressed, who are already thinking through, how do I compete? Because if you're a CEO of a company, a Fortune 500 company, you're responsible for 50,000 people. You need to maybe you have to make some decisions that over time, that's going to be 30,000 people you're responsible for. But you want at least those 30,000 people to feel valued, to be part of whichever company you're with, to do a good work. But if you don't make the right decisions, you shrink that down to zero pretty quickly. So I just think we're relying on people doing a good job, a moral job, an ethical job, and that's okay generally. But I think we've over-indexed on the government isn't working to be able to do all the kind of things that it needs to do, and I think unfortunately we're undermining government to stop it from doing it. Yeah, for business leaders that are listening, I
and we're seeing so much pressure, right? They know they need to move on AI, but they know their employees are scared, resistant, maybe sabotaging things. I mean, what should they do? What's the first thing you think they should think about? And obviously not the technology decision or the vendor selection, but the human piece of it. I mean, what's the conversation they need to have, and how should they have it?
With employees, I think the first thing they need to get really clear. They need to get really clear on their business strategy. And the reason I say that is because there isn't an AI strategy. There's just AI accelerating your business strategy. And if AI won't accelerate your business strategy, but AI somehow is separate from your business strategy, then you need to go back further and re-examine your business strategy. Once you've got your business strategy straight, you need to start translating that so that everyone in the organization lines up against that and starts doing it as best you can, which is for me where storytelling comes in, because you need to translate that strategy, give them a clear goal. We think about it as two stories, story one and story two. Story one is the journey. Story two is the destination. So you need to think about the destination, and the strategy of getting that. Then get as many people on board as you can, and for most people, they want to do a good job. They have the will. They may not have the skill. Figure out how you get them the skill. Remove the barriers that are in the way. It's not that hard. It's depressingly overwhelming, but logically, it's not that difficult, if you know what I mean. So yeah, I think you have to start there. If you don't know how, and I'll be honest, I'm the co-CEO of Fast Forward. I don't exactly know how AI will change the business value of Fast Forward, but I know it will. And I know I need to do certain things to get ready for that. So let's do those things, and let's be as clear with my people, the people that work at Fast Forward, as we can about what we're doing and why we're doing it. And I think it's the same thing. Just get people with you and get them on the bus and get moving.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great point too about the business strategy and the AI strategy. And I have this conversation a lot, like, oh, can you help us build this AI strategy? And yet it seems disconnected from the business. Well, the point of this is to tie all those together into a winning business strategy, right? So yeah, that's an interesting point.
It's a telltale sign. I mean, you and I have been around long enough to have seen this every single time. Let me have a digital strategy. Let me have a web strategy. Let me have a knowledge strategy. Let me have a re-engineering. Like whatever buzzword comes up, I have a strategy for it. And the reason I have a separate strategy and a separate, what I call a chief blank officer, is because I don't know what to do. And because I don't know what to do, I'm anointing one person with the job of figuring out what to do, and then I'll bring it back in. And the hard thing to admit is maybe I don't really have a robust business strategy in the first place, which no CEO ever likes to hear.
Yeah. No, you certainly don't want to stand in front of the board and try to admit that. That's scary. Well, it's all the time we have today, but it's a great conversation and really interesting. Before I let you go, one thing I like to do at the end of the show is get a recommendation for the audience. Somebody that you think that'd be interesting for them to follow, thought leader, an author, podcaster, whatever you think would be valuable for them, and not necessarily in an AI context, but some value that they could find in checking them out.
Well, it actually comes off the, do you even have the right business strategy? So an author, a thought leader, and I think he's a podcaster too, but I'm not 100% sure, is Bryce Hoffman. Bryce wrote the book American Icon, which is how I met him, because American Icon was about Alan Mullally's turnaround of Ford. And then he wrote another book called Red Teaming. And red teaming, if you don't know, is this idea of being a devil's advocate, of how do you pick apart a plan to figure out, is it right? Do we doing the right thing? And he's built a whole business around red teaming. He's a mine of useful information, Bryce, if you're listening to this. And he's a great guy as well. So I would follow Bryce Hoffman.
Yeah, great recommendation. Thanks. And Gavin, thanks so much for joining today. I really appreciate it.
No, you're very welcome. It was a fun conversation, Michael. Hopefully we can do it again.
Yeah, I hope so. And that's the show for this week. Thank you all for joining us. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to the show. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a review to help others find us. For more research on AI and other software, check out arianresearch.com. If you're an expert in AI, generative AI, or business automation, either as a provider or an end user, email your information to disambiguation@arianresearch.com. Don't forget to join us next week. Disambiguation is an Arian Research production. I'm Michael Fauscette, and this is the Disambiguation Podcast.